Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm John M. Hawkins. The show is called My Strategy, and we're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. We're very happy to be here with you today. My Strategy radio show is on Saturdays. It's live at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Today, we're going to be talking about trust your gut or not. We're going to talk about the science behind gut thinking. We're going to talk about gut feelings. The science behind it, as I stated, trust your gut might be rational. There are times when you should not trust your gut and gut decisions on complex decisions, and ultimately we're going to help you build your strategy. We're very happy to be here today. Saturday is a great day of the week to reflect on your strategy, but keep in mind that any day is a good day for you to reflect on your strategy. The My Strategy radio show continues to grow. We're on iHeart, iTunes, Player FM, YouTube, SoundCloud, Spreaker, and many more digital platforms. So if you'd like to go listen to this show in podcast form or listen to any one of the other shows, feel free to check them out there. You can find me on most social media platforms. My Twitter handle is @HawkinsJohn, and my website is johnmhawkins.com. And just like anything in life, we need to have a strategy and a plan to help us reach our goals because the best laid plans don't always work. This week, I'm looking for stories on gut decisions, intuition decisions. Do you have a good example or perhaps a tip or a trick? You can send it to talk@johnmhawkins.com. Like I said, today we're going to be talking about trusting your gut or not. In this show, we're going to be talking about how gut feelings might be more than just a feeling. There actually is some science behind it, in some scientific journals. We're going to talk a little bit about your instinct versus intuition. We're going to talk a little bit about how your gut might be a rational decision, but it has developed a bad reputation over the years. And emotions are not just dumb responses. Some of these emotions do have merit. We'll talk about when you should not be trusting your gut decision. Intuition is aligned with our automatic subconscious judgment. But imagine if you were being accused of a crime which you didn't commit, and everyone relied on their intuition rather than the facts. I'm going to talk about decision-making and trusting your gut and how human intuition may seem to be a reliable way to make decisions. But what happens when we detach our rigorous analysis and facts? We're then going to talk about how you can create your strategy to make better decisions by either trusting your gut or not. Got an article here by Samantha Olson. It's called The Science of Intuition. She says intuition plays a greater role in physical biology than most think. A little voice in the back of your mind that says, don't trust them. Don't walk down that alley. Don't go to that party tonight. And think twice before investing in a stock. It isn't just a passing subconscious thought. We thrive in a culture that believes rationality and prevailing scientific, proven logic rules over the knee-jerk reaction to pull out of the parking lot or investigate a partner's alibi. There are just a few certain feelings humans obligatorily follow without concrete reasoning. So there is a study published in the journal Psychological Science, which revealed how the body is able to speak intuitively to the mind by dealing out a card game. Researchers designed a game based on no obvious strategy, but they forced participants to rely solely on their hunches. Each participant was hooked up to a heart monitor and a finger sensor to measure sweat secretion. Most players figured out how to improve and eventually win the game. And researchers realized that the winners were those who listened to their heart rate. Their heart rate would speed up before they made a certain choice, but people mistook the subtle bodily changes for their intuition. She goes on to say, we often talk about intuition coming from the body in following our gut instincts and trusting our hearts, says the study's co-author Barnaby D. Dunn of the Medical Research Council Cognition and Brain Sciences Unit in Cambridge, UK, who said in a press release, "What happens in our bodies really does appear to influence what goes on in our minds. We should be careful about following these gut instincts. However, sometimes they help and sometimes they hinder our decision-making." The article goes on to talk about the instincts versus intuitions. Instincts derive the word instinctus or impulse, indicating that it's the body's biological tendency to make one's choice over another. It is the innate inclination towards a particular behavior that typically relies on a pattern of behavior in response to certain stimuli. The key to understand our brains is by remembering that humans, after all, are animals, which are born with a certain toolbox full of strategies and social impetuses that help us survive. It is instinctively engraved in us to recognize when to run from a perceived danger known as the fight or flight response, secreted into our bloodstreams by adrenal glands. Babies are born knowing how to feed from their mothers, while mothers know when there is something amiss with their offspring. It is the proverbial sixth sense we have shadowed behind the 5 testable ones: see, touch, taste, smell, and hear. She says on the flip side, the word intuition comes from the word intuition or consideration, which is formed by a collection of beliefs, experiences, and memories. The intuition system is more hardwired into the human species than commonly understood. It is the automatic, mindless thought process that doesn't require analysis or deep thinking. Science relies on heuristic techniques for problem solving, learning, or discovery that engages in a practical approach to action that gut reactions can't evidently rival. Unfortunately, gut feelings can also be silenced. When we humans are forced or denied certain feelings during their primal stages of mental, physical, and above all emotional growth, guts can be faulty. A childhood hijacked by abuse or neglectful parents or guardians can create excessive self-doubt, irrational fear, or a clouded thought process, making it difficult to filter traumatic past experiences from gut intuition. Overwhelming stimuli can lead us to make it difficult for a person to see decisions in front of them without clarity. She says women, on the other hand, may have a stronger ability to make successful, intuitive decisions because of their exceptional skills in reading other humans. Female ancestors needed to evaluate a situation quickly in order to tune into their infants and their environment for protection and survival. Their brains were trained with peak awareness because they were protecting a heart that was outside of their own bodies. Female brains therefore evolved to have a larger composition and ability to organize chunks of environmental information at the time, giving them an edge to read people. You're listening to My Strategy. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. We're very happy to be here with you today. My Strategy radio shows live and on Saturdays at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Today we've been talking about trusting your gut or not. Right before the break, we were talking about gut feelings. Now, they might be more than just a feeling. In this segment, I want to talk about gut thinking and how it could be a rational decision. We've got an article here by Valerie Van Mullicom. And it says, trusting your gut could be the most rational way to make decisions. And I think you're going to find that over this show, we're going to try and explore both angles, the trust your gut and use data approach. So as we go through this show, I want you to think about the pros and cons of each way of trying to solve problems and make decisions. And hopefully by the end of the show, we're going to be able to put all those together and create a strategy. Valerie says, indeed, relying on your intuition generally has a bad reputation, especially in the Western part of the world where analytical thinking has been steadily promoted over the past few decades. Gradually, many have come to think that humans have progressed from relying on their primitive, magical, and religious thinking to analytical and scientific thinking. As a result, they view emotion and intuition as fallible, whimsical tools. However, she says, this attitude is based on a myth of cognitive process. Emotions are actually not dumb responses that always need to be ignored or even corrected by rational faculties. They are appraisals of what you have just experienced or thought of. In this sense, they also are a form of information processing. Intuition or gut feelings are the result of a lot of processing that happens in the brain. Research suggests that the brain is a large predictive machine, constantly comparing incoming sensory information and current experiences against stored knowledge and memories of previous experiences, and predicting what will come next. This is described in what scientists call the predictive processing framework. Makes sense. This ensures that the brain is always as prepared to deal with the current situation as optimally as possible. And when a mismatch occurs, something that wasn't predicted, your brain updates its cognitive models. She says this matching between prior models, our past experiences, and a current experience happens automatically and subconsciously. She says intuitions occur when your brain has made a significant mismatch between the cognitive model and the current experience. But this has not yet reached your subconscious awareness. She says, for example, imagine you're out driving on a country road in the dark, listening to some music, when you suddenly have an intuition to drive more to one side of the lane. As you continue driving, you notice that you only just missed a massive pothole that had you hit, it would have caused significant damage to your car. You are glad you relied on your gut feeling. Even if you don't know where that gut feeling came from. She says, in reality, though, the car in front of you, far off in the distance, had made a similar swerve. Since they were locals and knew the road, you picked up on this without consciously registering it, and so you swerved slightly as the car did in front of you. But you think maybe that was your intuition. She says, when you have a lot of experience in certain areas, the brain has more information to match the current experience against. This makes your intuitions more reliable. This means that, as with creativity, your intuitions can actually improve with experience. And I think you're going to find that this is a consistent theme, right? The more experience you have in life, the better decisions you're able to make. But it also means, as we learned earlier, that our past experiences, traumas, those types of things that we've experienced in life can impact our thought process. So as we're thinking about our strategy, as we're starting to develop ourselves, we want to think about what are those inhibitors or limiters in our lives? What are the things that we absolutely have to work through so that we can start to leverage our intuition, so that we can build on those past experiences? And I've talked a lot about this in past shows. We're not going to cover it a lot today. But if you are in a situation where you're trying to build your strategy, you're trying to personally develop, and you have one of those big issues, those blockers that has shaped you from a young age, it is imperative to get that identified and corrected before you can evolve to the next level of thinking. When you have a lot of experience in certain areas, the brain has more information to match the current experience against. In psychological literature, intuition is often explained as one of two general modes of thinking: analytical reasoning. Intuitive thinking is described as automatic, fast, subconscious. Analytical thinking, on the other hand, is slow, logical, conscious, and deliberate. And that's the theme you're going to see throughout today. Intuitive thinking, fast. Gut thinking, fast. Analytical thinking, slow, logical, conscious, and deliberate. She says many take the division between analytical and intuitive thinking to mean the two types of processing or thinking styles are completely opposite, and that they work in a seesaw manner. She says, however, in metadata analysis, an investigation where the impact of a group's studies is measured has showed that the analytical and intuitive thinking are typically not correlated and could happen at the same time. So while it is true that one style of thinking likely feels dominant over the other in any given situation, in particular analytical thinking, the subconscious nature of intuitive thinking makes it hard to determine exactly when it occurs, since so much happens under the bonnet of our awareness. She says, indeed, the two thinking styles are in fact complementary and can work in concert. We regularly employ them together. Even groundbreaking scientific research may start with intuitive knowledge that enables the scientist to formulate innovative ideas and hypotheses, which later can be validated through rigorous testing. She said, what's more, while intuition is seen as sloppy and inaccurate, analytical thinking can be detrimental as well. Studies have shown that overthinking can seriously hinder our decision-making. As you start to think about this, one of the things that I think about is think strategically, act tactically. And doesn't that correlate nicely to that gut decision, but also the rational way of going and identifying and getting data? So as we start to think about this gut versus data-driven, there's a lot of parallels between strategic and tactical thinking. And we're going to want to keep that in mind as we continue to build our strategy. You're listening to My Strategy. I am your host, John M. Hawkins, coming to live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk about why you should not trust your gut. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins, coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. Show is My Strategy, and today we're talking about trusting your gut or not. I'm talking about the science behind gut thinking, intuition, and how all of that works together. Right before the break, we were talking about how trusting your gut could be a rational decision. Makes sense. In this segment, we're going to flip the script, and we're going to talk about why you should not trust your gut. Why you should not trust your gut. Got an article here by Catherine Ramsland. Trust Your Gut or Not is the title. She says, not so fast. Cognitive research has found that the formation of a perceptual frame involves two primary avenues for processing information. Some moves through rational channels, and some through intuitive channels. Intuition is aligned with automatic subconscious judgment, which can be highly influenced by emotion. It's fast, and its conclusions arrive without analysis. Thus, it's vulnerable to personal bias and error. Although analytical reasoning is slower, it offers perceptive, along with awareness of a greater range of factors. The result of careful, objective analysis is usually more reliable. In other words, just because an idea feels does not make it right. Gut instincts, while useful, can also form a threshold diagnosis that becomes an immovable anchor thwarting full analysis. This is completely the different perspective, isn't it? Right before we were talking about how important the gut feeling was, how intuition is real, it's tied to our biology, and now we're hearing that it can be useful, but it thwarts the full analysis if we go with it. She said she came across the website of J. Scott Hornoff. Now, J. Scott Hornoff was convicted of murder, and he spent more than 6 years in prison before being exonerated. And he wrote a book about his ordeal. She says what was unique about his tale is that J. Scott Hornoff was a detective himself. And like his fellow officers, he'd once trusted his gut. But then he discovered that his accusers' gut instincts about him had been dead wrong. Imagine that. You've been convicted of a crime. You're in jail. You've been there for 6 years. You were a police officer. You knew what it was like, a detective, to be out there trying to prove crimes. And you now were in prison because people had trusted their gut. She says she asked J. Scott Hornoff to say a few things about his ordeal. Here is what he wrote. Mr. Hornoff said, "Imagine being innocent and being accused of a crime you did not commit. Imagine that you can choose the detectives who are looking at you as a potential suspect. Would you rather have someone be guided by logic and facts or by feelings when deciding your fate? There are no witnesses placing you anywhere near the scene of the crime. There's no physical evidence linking you to the crime." Mr. Hornoff also said, "Spiritualists and others who make a living advocating for following their inner voice will often tell you that by doing so, you will lead a more peaceful life and that it is less at odds with the universal energy." He says cops are the most often associated as the ones who follow their guts or the tingle down their spine in investigating a crime complaint. However, this course of analysis can often cause the investigators to ignore facts and result in their beliefs forcing every shred of speculation and conjecture to fit the crime. Kind of like the confirmation bias that we discussed in last week's podcast. Hornoff says scientists have even devoted studies that claim we access parts of our brains we are unaware of when making decisions. Yet these instances would be irrelevant when discussing an examination of facts which pertain to a case in which she has no prior knowledge of. The study further asserts that unconscious memory may come into play. For example, in recognizing the face of a perpetrator of a crime or the correct answer on a test or the choice from a horde of consumer products may be driven by memories that are quite alive on an unconscious level. He goes on to say, yet there exist numerous other studies which contradict these assertions that eyewitnesses' identification can be made by gut instinct. In fact, nearly 78% of the 300-plus exonerations involving the Innocence Projects are directly associated to mistaken eyewitness identification. Mary O'Toole, a former FBI profiler who worked on the Unabomber, Green River Killer, and other cases, discovered that most of the vicious serial killers acted as the most harmless, and many investigators had dismissed suspects using their gut feelings, believing the man they were evaluating was a good guy. How could the good guy do it? He says, I too have felt the negative effect of all investigators' gut instincts, whether their intuition was initially based on a dislike or other prejudicial feelings. I was indicted, tried, convicted of first-degree murder, and sentenced to life in prison for a crime which I did not commit. I spent 6.5 years wrongfully imprisoned before the one responsible came forward and confessed. He goes on to say, at the beginning of my ordeal in 1989, I was a city police detective working in Warwick, Rhode Island. I had been unfaithful with a woman who was murdered in my city. I understood why I was questioned. However, I requested and passed a polygraph examination. My clothes were not seized and examined. My vehicle was not processed. He says, I agree that I was eliminated without a thorough investigation, but I wasn't directly investigated. and I was grateful when I was told I was no longer a suspect. So here's a man who'd been in prison for 6 years. Yes, he knew the woman. He was a suspect. Witnesses, no witnesses, but those involved relied on their gut instinct that Mr. Horner was guilty. And while he says it did look like it was reasonable for him to be a suspect, why was he convicted? Why was Mr. Hornoff convicted? And that's where I think we need to be thinking about our gut and how we use it to make decisions. In certain cases, it might make sense, but in other cases, we need to be able to be fact-driven. You're listening to My Strategy. I am your host, John M. Hawkins, coming to you live on the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk about decision-making and how human intuition seems to be a more reliable way to make decisions. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins, coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. We're very happy to be here with you today. I'm glad you could join us. My name is John Hawkins. The show is My Strategy, and we talk about personal development on a weekly basis. Our episodes are live and on Saturdays at 10 a.m. Pacific. Today we're talking about trusting your gut or not. We've been talking about the science behind gut thinking, talking about gut feelings. Trusting your gut could be rational. When not to trust your gut. Talking about decisions and how we might want to think about gut decisions on complex cases or decisions. We're going to help you build your strategy. Right before the break, we were talking about when you should not trust your gut. We talked about a situation where a police detective was put in prison for the murder of a woman. He did not commit the murder, but he says that everyone involved in the case trusted their gut. In this segment, I want to talk about decision-making and how we shouldn't trust our gut. Continuing on that theme, first part of the show in the earlier segments, we talked about gut decisions and how great it was. And now we've pivoted and we're talking about how it's not so great. The reason we're doing that is I want to show the difference between the two types of decision-making. And as we put together our strategy, we're going to see how the two ultimately can work together. This article is by Eric Bonabou. It says, decision-making, don't trust your gut. Making high-stakes business decisions has always been hard. But in recent decades, as the complexities of a global commerce have deepened, it's become tougher than ever. The choices facing managers and the data requirements and analysis have multiplied even as the time for analyzing them has shrunk. One decision-making tool, human intuition, seems to offer a reliable alternative to painstaking fact-gathering and analysis. Encouraged by scientific research on intuition, top managers feel increasingly confident that when faced with complicated choices, they can just trust their gut. Indeed, a survey was conducted by an executive search firm, Christian and Timbers, and they revealed that 45% of corporate executives now rely more on instincts than on facts and figures when running their business. So that's 45% of these corporate executives. Decision-making consultant Gary Klein, in his book Intuition at Work, expresses the common wisdom when he says that intuition is at the center of decision-making process, and that analysis, at best, is a supporting tool for making decisions. The trust in intuition is understandable. People have always sought to put their faith in mystical forces when confronted with earthly confusion. But it can be dangerous. Intuition definitely has a place in decision-making. You should not ignore your instincts. Or anymore, you should not ignore your conscience. But anyone who thinks that intuition is a substitute for reason is indulging in a risky delusion. Detached from the rigorous analysis, intuition is a fickle and undependable guide. It is likely to lead to a disaster as it is to success. And while some have argued that intuition becomes more valuable in highly complex and changeable environments, the opposite actually can be true. the more you have to evaluate, the more data you have to weigh, and the more unprecedented the challenges you face, the less you should rely on instinct and more reason and analysis. And I think you're going to find that this is true, that as we start to learn more about when to use intuition, when we need to use our gut decision, the more complex of a decision that has to be made, the research is generally tending to not using your intuition, rather relying on the data. Whereas with some of the less complex decisions, where you have personal experience in a situation, where you've been here and done that, that is when you can start to rely on your intuition, on your gut. And you might say, well, John, that makes perfect sense, right? If I know something, I know how to make the decision. So I think one of the challenges is that as we're trying to build our personal strategy, as we're trying to develop ourselves, we just want to be cognizant that while we can trust our gut, and it might have gotten us someplace in the past, we need to be aware of when we don't know what we don't know and start to use more reason and analysis. The author goes on to say that brings us back to the essential conundrum facing today's harried executive. How do you analyze more in less time? The answer may lie, and it now appears, in technology. Powerful new decision support tools can help executives quickly sort through the vast numbers of alternatives and pick the best ones. Combine this with experience, insight, and analytical skills of a good management team. Those tools offer companies a good way to consistently sound and rational choices in the face of bewildered complexity. Think about that. You know, they're talking about AI and machine learning and, you know, all these algorithms that are put in place in the technology that's out there today. And, you know, when you go to your favorite shopping site, it knows your trends, it knows your patterns, it tracks what you're doing, and it starts to provide recommendations to you. And some of these are reason-based. So, for example, if you trust your gut on a certain product that's in a shopping cart and just bought that without any additional information, you might make the wrong decision. With AI, machine learning, what they can do is they can provide reviews of a product. They can provide technical analysis of the product. You can link what is warranty to that product. So I think that's where we're starting to see the difference between your intuition, your gut, and when to make a decision based on that versus relying on additional data, versus relying on being able to have all of the facts. Now, there is analysis paralysis where if you analyze something too much, you may never make a decision. And I think maybe that's where we're seeing technology come in and help us out. Technology can help us pull that data together faster. It can help us put together some alternatives and correlate it so that we don't just have to rely on our intuition, but we've got data behind it to support it. So you're now seeing how the two are coming together. And if decision-making becomes easier, now we can rely on our intuition, but back that up with real-world evidence. You're listening to My Strategy. I am your host, John M. Hawkins, coming live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk more about how reliable gut decision-making is, and we're also going to help you build your strategy. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins, coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. Show is My Strategy. Right before the break, we were talking about decision-making and trusting your gut. In this segment, I want to talk a little bit more about that, and then I want to help you develop your strategy to trust your gut. So right before the break, we were talking about your instincts and how busy executives need to make decisions. We talked a little bit about artificial intelligence and if we could find a way to bring data faster to us in the form of information. It would give us the ability to trust our gut, but also have data to back it up. And, I want to continue on this topic a little bit before I jump into building the strategy, because I think some of these are interesting. But it says there is an intuition allure. It says the stories are certainly seductive, and they're talking about business magnates who have gone out and been super successful. Fred Smith had insight into the transportation business, and despite widespread skepticism, goes on to create Federal Express. Michael Eisner hears a pitch for an offbeat game show, knowing in his heart it's going to be a blockbuster, immediately commits to developing Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. George Soros senses in his bones a big shift in currency markets and acts on that hunch, makes $1 billion. Robert Pittman has a future of the future online media while taking a shower and rushes to lead America Online in an entirely new direction. Said these reasons, such as tales, have become business legends, is that we want to believe in the transformative power of intuition. For one thing, it's less romantic. It raises business above the drab. No, for one thing, it's romantic. It raises business above the drab world of spreadsheets and income statements and turns into something of an art form. The executive office becomes a place of inspiration and vision rather than planning and number crunching. For another, it simplifies. It says that we needn't worry if we can't decipher complex challenges rationally. Our subconscious minds will automatically be able to deliver the right answer. We just need to relax, close our eyes, and let the magic happen. Finally, it makes us feel special. Any idiot can run the numbers, but the gift of a good gut, that's reserved for the true business elite. So I think what we're talking about here is intuition and how we hear all these stories about executives and leaders who are able to build companies, who are able to make decisions, who are able to create visions. And it might look like they're just trusting their gut. It looks like they're using intuition to make all of these decisions. They don't need spreadsheets. We learned earlier that 45% of managers make decisions on their gut and not always looking at the data. But I want to comment on this briefly, because as we're trying to develop our personal strategy, as we're trying to be better at decision making, one of the things that could get overlooked in looking at these great stories is that we aren't Fred Smith. We aren't Michael Eisner. We aren't George Soros. And all of the events that happened up until the point when they made that decision had an impact on them being able to make that gut level decision. They had experience. They had been through successful ventures and failed ventures. So while it looks like they were an overnight success, leaned on their intuition to make these great decisions, they were not overnight successes. And so I think as we build our strategy and we start to think about how are we going to start using our gut or not, we need to really think about this from a systematic approach. And the systematic approach is something we talk about every week, which is, being aware. What is the vision we're trying to accomplish? What are our core values? We then need to assess and analyze. Taking a look at the situation. Are there situations where we're trusting on our gut too much and we're failing? Are there situations where we're too analytical and analysis paralysis and focusing on that? We need to assess and analyze that and figure out what sorts of decisions have we been making. Have we been relying on gut solely, or are we able to bring in analytics and data at the proper time? We then need to strategize and plan, which means that some of those courses of actions that we're on, it's great to use our gut decision. Maybe these are less complex decisions where we can rely on those intuition. But with other complex decisions where we do not have the experience, where we do not have the understanding, the awareness, and we can't make a decision, we need to rely on the data. We need to rely on the data, and we need to be specific about when to make decisions using our gut and we need to be specific and cognizant of when to use the data. And then we need to implement our plan. So if you've been making decisions with your gut and they haven't been leading to success, I mean, you should know whether or not you're getting towards your goals. Maybe you don't, maybe you do. But the thing is really making sure that when we implement these new changes and our new way of thinking, let's say you're a complete analytical thinker and you want to start using your gut. Well, you don't want to start using your gut if you are buying stocks for the first time. You might have a favorite company or, think that this pandemic that we have is going to open up a market and it's going to grow. Maybe you've got the experience and can make that decision. Great if you do. But if you don't, that's a more complex decision. And I would say that if you don't have that experience, if you haven't been there, done that, you're going to need to rely on the data, or at least look at the data before you make the gut decision. Now, if you've got something that you've been doing day in, day out, and you feel like your experience is good enough, then maybe the gut is the best thing to do, right? I mean, it works for us. And so once we start implementing these new strategies, we then need to look at them and see what is working and what is not. Are these gut level decisions really helping us get closer to our goal? Or are they hindering us from accomplishing those goals and objectives? If you took a certain type of decision and it was a gut decision, was that the best choice? Or did you need data to support it? And that's where, as you start to look at gut decisions versus going out and getting analysis and data, there really is this hybrid approach where sometimes you're going to need to use your gut and other times you're going to need to use the data. You're listening to My Strategy. I am your host, John M. Hawkins, coming live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk about how you can put your plan in place. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm John M. Hawkins. The show is My Strategy. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. We're very happy to be here with you today on this Saturday. Glad you could join us. Our episodes are live at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. And in case you missed this broadcast, you can listen on iHeartRadio and Apple iTunes, or just search for one of the many other digital platforms that will host this show in a podcast form. In case you'd like to have something covered on the show, you can send an email to talk@johnmhawkins.com. That's talk@johnmhawkins.com. Or just give us a call at 844-MY-STRATEGY. Today we've been talking about trust your gut or not. Today we've been talking about gut feelings and how they might be more than just a feeling. We've talked a little bit about the science of gut feelings and how gut feelings actually do have a connection with our biology. Talked about instincts versus intuition and how our instincts can help us make decisions. But trusting your gut, it might be a rational decision, but it has developed a bad reputation over the years, the past few decades. And, the tendency has really been to focus on the data. Focus on the data. What's the data say? But these emotions that we have aren't just dumb responses. Many of them do have merit. These gut feelings that we have are the result of a cognitive process. It's our experiences, our lessons learned, our life telling us what we should or shouldn't do. So as we're told not to trust our gut, we do know that there is some benefit in trusting the gut. But in some cases, you shouldn't trust your gut. We learned about a detective who was sentenced to murder, put in jail, spent 6.5 years in jail. He did everything he could to try and uncover the facts behind the cases, to try and identify what had gone wrong. And as he went through the case and looked at all of the other detectives who were analyzing his case, he realized something interesting. He realized that each of the detectives in the case was relying on their gut instincts rather than getting the data. They focused on circumstantial evidence, the fact that this detective actually was in a relationship with the woman that died, led them to connect the dots. And so as a result of that, they didn't go get the car, process it for fingerprints, process for data. Turned out that there were some negative effects of this investigation, and the detective was not guilty after the real killer came forward. So what this tells us is that with decision making and trusting our gut, with complex decisions, we might want to lean more towards the facts. And while intuition does seem to be reliable, we do need to have the facts. We also learned that some of the big-time business tycoons, it appears they're making decisions based off intuition, when in reality, they've got years of experience. So as we're starting to develop our plan, as we're starting to put a plan in place, we need to be aware of what are some of those patterns in decision-making and trusting our gut that we're doing today. How effective are those? And if we're not as effective as making gut decisions, maybe we do need to rely on more data. Or maybe it's a hybrid of the two. Or maybe we decide that, we're going to flip the script, and for smaller decisions, trust the gut, and larger for larger decisions, we're going to be focusing solely on data to make them. Ultimately, if you want to have a change, it comes down to a conscious prioritization and commitment to your goals and objectives, which means that you are going to have to implement them. Well, that's all the time we have for this week. You've been listening to My Strategy. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins, coming live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. Been a pleasure. We'll see you next time.